Okay, so you want to own a pharmacy, buy a corner store, put a counter in the back, hire a pharmacist, and wait. People get sick. People always get sick. They come in holding a piece of paper, you hand them a bottle, insurance pays you. You are not selling a want, you are selling a need. Nobody negotiates. Nobody shops around when they are standing there with pneumonia. The prescriptions arrive whether the economy is good or bad, whether it is raining, whether anyone feels like shopping. It is the most recession-proof storefront on the street. That is the dream. And it is not entirely wrong. The problem is that the person handing you the money is not the person holding the prescription. It is not the doctor. It is not the insurance company either, not really. There is somebody else standing between you and every dollar you earn. They set the price you get paid. They do not tell you what that price is until after you have already handed over the medication. And in a growing number of cases, that price is lower than what you paid to buy the pill in the first place. Let us start with what a pharmacy actually is, because almost everyone gets this wrong, including people who buy one. Most people picture a pharmacy as a small retail store that happens to sell medicine, shelves, aisles, a counter, like a convenience store with a pharmacist. That is not a pharmacy. That is the building a pharmacy sits inside. A pharmacy is a claims processing business with a shop attached. Think about it this way. A restaurant sells you food and you pay. A hardware store sells you a hammer and you pay. A pharmacy hands you a $400 inhaler. You pay $10, and then it submits an electronic claim to a company you have never heard of in another state and waits to find out what it earned. The transaction at the counter is not the sale. It is the paperwork. More than 90% of an independent pharmacy's revenue comes from prescriptions, which means more than 90% of the business is not retail at all. It is billing. The pharmacist is a healthcare provider, the store is a storefront, but the actual business model is a subcontractor filing claims to a middleman for a rate that the subcontractor did not negotiate and cannot see. And there is a second thing hiding in that arrangement, which is that a pharmacy is one of the only retail businesses on earth where the customer does not know the price, does not care about the price, and is not the one paying it. The person at your counter is comparing one number, their copay, $10 here, $10 everywhere. From where they stand, every pharmacy in the country is selling the identical product at the identical price with the identical packaging. There is no premium version. There is no house brand. The pill is the pill, and it is legally required to be the same pill, which means you cannot compete on product. You cannot compete on price because you do not set the price. You can compete on convenience, on location, on whether someone knows your name, and on almost nothing else. Hold all of that. It becomes the whole story. So you want to open one. What does it cost? You have two paths. Build it or buy it. Building means starting from nothing. A lease in a location with enough foot traffic and enough doctors nearby. A build-out with a compliant dispensing area, a controlled substance safe, refrigeration, counseling space. A pharmacy management system, a point-of-sale system, state board licensing, a DEA registration, NPI numbers, contracts with every insurance network you want to bill, and then inventory. Inventory is where new owners get surprised. A working pharmacy needs somewhere between $150,000 and $300,000 of drugs sitting on shelves before it fills a single prescription. Not a warehouse. Shelves. That is money that is already gone, sitting there in boxes, some of it expiring on a clock you cannot pause. Added up, and building an independent pharmacy from scratch generally runs somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000 before the doors open, and it can go well past that. And then you wait. A new pharmacy has no patience. It has no prescription history. It takes 2 to 4 years to build a script count that supports the overhead, and most of that time you are burning cash to stay open while a chain 3 blocks away already has everyone's refills on autopilot. So most people buy instead. And when you buy a pharmacy, here is the strange part. You are not really buying the store. You are buying the file. The prescription file is the list. Every patient, Every medication, every refill schedule, that is the asset. The shelves are worth almost nothing. The build-out is worth almost nothing. The lease might be a liability. The thing with value is a database of people who will come back next month without being asked. That is why independent pharmacies get priced on their script count and their cash flow, not their square footage. Deals get done at a multiple of earnings, usually a low one, because the buyer knows exactly how fragile those earnings are. And it is why, when a pharmacy dies, the buyers do not want the building. They want the list. They will buy the list, close the store, and move your customers to their store across town, which tells you something uncomfortable about the asset. The most valuable thing you own is a set of relationships with people who are, on paper, free to leave tomorrow and who mostly stay out of habit. There is no lease on a patient. There is no contract. There is a refill schedule and an assumption. Remember that. It comes back. Now you are open. The costs start. First, people. A pharmacist has to be physically present for the pharmacy to legally dispense, not on call, present. That is not a manager you can replace with a part-timer. In the United States, the median pharmacist salary runs around $137,000. And if you own the store, you are frequently the pharmacist, which means you have not hired an employee, you have hired yourself into a job you cannot leave. Add technicians, add a clerk, add a delivery driver if you want to compete. Payroll at a typical independent runs somewhere around $400,000 to $500,000 a year. Then rent, utilities, insurance, liability coverage, software licensing, the wholesaler ordering system, accreditation fees, credit card processing, security, and compliance. Compliance is not a line item people expect. You are handling controlled substances. That means the DEA. That means logs, counts, reconciliation, audits. A discrepancy in a controlled substance count is not an accounting error. It is a regulatory event. Pharmacies have lost licenses over record keeping, not theft. Record keeping. And it is not only the license at risk. When the opioid litigation landed, the settlements against the major pharmacy chains and distributors ran into the tens of billions of dollars. Those were not manufacturers. Those were the counters. The legal theory was that the dispenser had a duty to notice, which means every prescription you fill carries a small, permanent piece of liability that has nothing to do with whether you made money on it. Then there is shrink, which in a pharmacy is not the same problem it is anywhere else. A stolen candy bar costs you $1. A stolen bottle of controlled medication costs you $1, a DEA report, an investigation, and a conversation you do not want to have. Chains responded by locking merchandise behind plastic. That solved the theft and quietly destroyed the impulse purchase, which was the high-margin part of the store. And then there is expiry. Drugs die on a clock. Product that does not sell before its date does not go on clearance because you cannot discount a medication into moving faster. It goes back through reverse distribution and you recover some of it, and the rest is simply gone. So your inventory is not an asset that sits patiently. It is an asset with a countdown on every box. And then there is the wholesaler. 3 companies distribute the overwhelming majority of pharmaceuticals in the United States: McKesson, Cencora, and Cardinal Health. Together they move roughly 90% of drugs in the country. You will sign a primary supplier agreement with one of them, and that agreement typically requires you to buy the large majority of your inventory from them, often 85% or more, in exchange for your pricing. Read that again. Your cost of goods is set by a contract that requires you to keep buying from the company, setting your cost of goods. And here is the timing problem underneath it. You pay your wholesaler on roughly a 2-week cycle. You get reimbursed by insurance on roughly a 30-day cycle, so you are permanently financing the gap. Every prescription you fill, you buy first and get paid later. Growth makes it worse. The busier you get, the more cash you are floating. A pharmacy can go under while its script count is climbing. We have not talked about profit yet. Let us talk about where the money actually is. Because it is not where you think. The intuitive answer is brand name drugs, the expensive ones. The ones that cost hundreds of dollars a bottle. That is where the revenue is, obviously. The revenue, yes, not the profit. On a brand-name drug, you buy it for something close to what you get paid for it. Your margin is a few percent. You are moving hundreds of dollars across your counter to earn a handful of dollars. It looks like a big sale. It is a rounding error with a delivery risk attached. Generics are the opposite. Cheap, unglamorous, and the margin is far better. Roughly 83% of prescriptions at independent pharmacies are filled with a generic, and those are the ones that pay the rent. So here is the real number, and it is the one that explains everything else in this business. The gross profit on the average prescription at an independent pharmacy has been running somewhere in the range of $11 to $12. $11, not per hundred, per prescription. That is what is left after the drug is paid for. And out of that $11 comes the pharmacist, the technician, the rent, the software, the insurance, the electricity, and eventually you. Across the whole store, gross margin at an independent pharmacy has fallen to about 19.7%, the lowest in a decade. Net margin across retail pharmacy sits around 2 to 3%. 2 to 3%. On a business that requires a doctorate, a federal registration, and $250,000 of inventory. Which is why the front of the store matters more than it looks. The greeting cards, the vitamins, the reading glasses, the candy by the register, higher margins, no claim to file, no clawback, cash on the spot, and why the survivors have pushed into things that are not dispensing at all. Compounding, immunizations, long-term care packaging, durable medical equipment, clinical services. The pharmacy business is quietly trying to become something other than the pharmacy business. Because of what happens next. Here is the trap that kills pharmacies more reliably than competition, rent, theft, or Amazon combined. You do not set your price, and you do not know your price. When you fill an insured prescription, you are not billing the insurance company. You are billing a pharmacy benefit manager, a PBM. These are the companies that administer prescription drug coverage on behalf of insurers and employers, and three of them, CVS Caremark, Express Scripts, and Optum Rx, process the overwhelming majority of prescriptions in the United States. Now notice something. CVS Caremark is owned by CVS, which owns pharmacies. Express Scripts is owned by Cigna. Optum Rx is owned by United Health. The companies that decide what your pharmacy gets paid also own pharmacies that compete with yours. You cannot refuse to deal with them. If you will not sign, you cannot bill insurance. If you cannot bill insurance, you have no patients, because your patients do not choose the pharmacy that is best. They choose the pharmacy their plan covers. So you sign. And the contract is not negotiated. It is presented. Here is how it works in practice. You dispense the drug. You submit the claim. The reimbursement comes back at a rate set by the PBM's own internal pricing benchmark, which they maintain, which they update, and which you cannot audit. Then come the fees. A transaction fee on the claim itself, network fees, performance adjustments, amounts that are small individually and enormous across hundreds of thousands of claims a year. Until 2024, the worst of it was retroactive. Fees called DIR were clawed back months after the prescription was sold, so a pharmacy could not know at the counter whether a sale was profitable. You would fill a prescription in March and find out in September that you lost money on it. Those retroactive clawbacks were reformed and pushed to the point of sale. So the pharmacy finally gets to see the real number at the counter, and the real number, on a meaningful share of prescriptions, is below what the pharmacy paid for the drug. That is not a metaphor. Pharmacists describe filling prescriptions where the acquisition cost is around $100, and the reimbursement is a fraction of that. Owners report 20% of their scripts reimbursed below cost. One owner described losing more than $250,000 on a single drug in a single year, which produces the strangest sentence in American retail. There are pharmacies right now that hope you do not come in, because the busiest day of the month is the most expensive day of the month. Meanwhile, the Federal Trade Commission found that PBMs appear to be steering patients toward their own affiliated pharmacies for the most profitable drugs and away from the independents. Same drug, same claim, different rate depending on who owns the counter. And the FTC put numbers on the gap. On specialty generic drugs, its report found a case where pharmacies acquired a medication for an average of $27, and the PBM marked it up by more than $2,000, producing a reimbursement above $2,100 for a 30-day supply, a markup of over 7,700%. The FTC also identified roughly $1.4 billion extracted through spread pricing, which is the practice of billing the health plan one amount and paying the pharmacy a smaller one and keeping the difference. Almost all of that spread, about 97% of it, came from prescriptions filled at pharmacies the PBM did not own. Read that last part slowly. The largest spread was taken on the claims filed by the independents. The middleman's best margin was harvested from the stores it competes with. So when you look at a pharmacy that is failing, the instinct is to assume the drugs are not selling. The drugs are selling. Somebody else is being paid for them. This is the part that makes pharmacy different from every business we have looked at. A mall owner can lower rent. An airport can raise fees. A bank can reprice its loans. A pharmacy owner cannot do any of it. You cannot raise your price. You cannot choose your customer. You cannot leave the network. You can only fill more prescriptions, each of which might lose money. Now watch what that does at scale. Rite Aid was more than a century old. It filed for Chapter 11 in October of 2023, restructured, emerged in 2024 as a private company with less debt and what it called a right-sized footprint, and told everyone the turnaround was working. It filed for bankruptcy again in May of 2025, 2 trips to bankruptcy court in 2 years. And this time there was no restructuring. There was liquidation. Every store. The chain completed its wind down in late 2025 and stopped existing. Now look at what happened to the corpse, because this is the part that tells you what a pharmacy really is. CVS did not buy Rite Aid stores. CVS bought the prescription files from hundreds of closed Rite Aid locations and kept only 63 of the actual buildings. Hundreds of stores, 63 buildings wanted. They bought the lists and let the real estate go dark. The rest of the industry is doing the same arithmetic. Walgreens announced in October of 2024 that it was closing approximately 1,200 stores after its own chief executive said the model was not sustainable. In August of 2025, Walgreens was taken private by Sycamore Partners in a deal valued at more than $10 billion, ending its run as a public company, and the closures accelerated from there. CVS closed roughly 900 stores between 2022 and 2024 and kept going. And underneath the chains, the independents are vanishing faster. More than 3,850 net retail pharmacies closed in 2024 alone. In the first 3 months of 2025, over 300 more closed, and 237 of those were independents. Nearly 16 million Americans now live in a pharmacy desert. There are towns in Mississippi where the only drugstore in the county closed, and the nearest replacement is 20 miles in any direction. Not because the town stopped getting sick, because filling their prescriptions cost more than the reimbursement. The states noticed. Tennessee passed a law barring PBMs from reimbursing below acquisition cost. Alabama's Community Pharmacy Relief Act took effect in October of 2025 and set a floor tied to the state Medicaid rate. North Carolina passed the Script Act, which requires PBMs to admit any pharmacy willing to meet the contract terms, bars them from steering patients with higher co-pays, and prohibits them from paying their own pharmacies more than they pay yours. There was a federal executive order in 2025 and an FTC enforcement campaign behind it. So the rescue is arriving. Slowly, unevenly, one legislature at a time, and in some states, it has not arrived at all. Mississippi's reform bill did not make it through, and the pharmacies do not get to wait for the law. An owner described it plainly. Every day without a fix is another day somebody decides whether they can keep the lights on. That is the thing about a 2% margin. It does not give you time to be rescued, so let us do the math on the store you were going to buy. The optimistic version. You run a solid independent, around 60,000 prescriptions a year, which is roughly the industry average per store. Call it $3.5 million in total revenue. At a 20% gross margin, that is about $700,000 of gross profit for the year. Now the bills. Payroll, $450,000. Rent, $60,000. Everything else, insurance, software, utilities, delivery, compliance, professional fees, call it $140,000. You are left with about $50,000, plus whatever you paid yourself as the pharmacist. That is the good scenario. A business with $3.5 million moving through it, a doctorate behind the counter, $250,000 of inventory on the shelf, and the profit is a rounding error on top of your own salary. Now the bad scenario, and it does not require a disaster. Reimbursement rates get adjusted downward by 2 percentage points. Not a catastrophe. A contract update. On $3.5 million of revenue, that is $70,000 of gross profit gone. Your $50,000 profit is now a $20,000 loss. Nothing about your store changed. Nobody stopped coming in. A number in a database in another state moved, or a GLP-1 becomes popular in your town. Wonderful news, enormous revenue, patients lining up. Except the reimbursement barely covers acquisition, and you are floating thousands of dollars of inventory for 30 days per patient. Your revenue chart goes up and your bank account goes down. Some pharmacies simply stopped carrying those drugs. Not because there was no demand, because the demand was the problem. Or a chain opens a mile away with a copay structure your patient's plan prefers. You do not lose them because you were worse. You lose them because their plan told them to go. Now stack 2 of those in a row. Not 3. 2. A rate adjustment and a busy year on a drug that loses money. You have not been robbed. You have not been sued. You have not lost a single patient, and you are $150,000 down. Where does that come from? Not from profit because there was almost none. It comes from the inventory. You order less. You stop stocking the slow movers. A patient comes in, and you do not have it, so they go to the chain, and they do not come back, because the chain has their refill now. That is how a pharmacy actually dies. Not in an afternoon. In a slow substitution of what you carry for what you can afford to carry, until the shelves are honest about what happened. The difference between a good year and a bad year at this store is maybe $120,000. On a business with $3.5 million in revenue, that is a 3% swing, and 3% is the entire margin. That is what nobody tells you. This is not a business with thin margins. This is a business where the margin is thinner than the error bar on somebody else's spreadsheet. Pharmacy is one of the few businesses in the world with genuinely unlimited demand, total legal protection from casual competition, a licensed professional monopoly on the product, and customers who physically cannot go elsewhere for what they need. Every structural advantage a business can have, pharmacy has. And it is closing at a rate of thousands of stores a year. So how does a business with unlimited demand and no real competition lose money? Not because people stopped needing medicine, not because someone built a better drugstore, because the money stopped flowing through the counter and started flowing around it. So if you do decide to own a pharmacy, understand what you are actually buying. You are not buying a store. You are not buying a monopoly on a medical need. You are buying the right to purchase inventory at a price you do not control, hand it to a customer at a price you cannot set, and get paid an amount decided by a company that also owns your competitor. Every other business we have looked at had a lever. The mall owner could cut rent to hold a tenant. The airport could raise its fees, fight the regulator, rebuild the terminal. Even the bank, sitting on the most fragile balance sheet in commerce, at least got to choose who it lent to and at what rate. The pharmacy has no lever. It has a counter, a license, a shelf full of inventory it already paid for, and a claim it can only submit and wait on. The prescriptions will keep coming. That was never the question. The question is what they are worth when they arrive.